The marble floors gleamed under Denise Atwater's sneakers as she mopped quietly at 6:52 a.m., just as she had for the past 13 years. No one looked her way until she spoke fluent Mandarin to a lost executive from Shanghai. 2 minutes later, she was answering a delivery man's question in Spanish. Then came a French vendor, also assisted flawlessly. People turned, eyes widened, and then the CEO himself stopped mid-stride. Jonathan Kellerman had flown across the world managing billion-dollar deals, but nothing stunned him more than discovering his company's janitor spoke 9 languages fluently. What happened next would ripple through the halls of Halberg International and beyond. What began with a mop and a multilingual greeting would soon challenge every assumption about who deserves to lead, who gets overlooked, and how brilliance hides in plain sight. Because Denise Atwater wasn't just a janitor. She was a mirror to a system that forgot how to see. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. At Halberg International's downtown Fort Worth headquarters, mornings were a blur of caffeine-clipped heels and calendar alerts. Suits slid past each other with practiced nods, earbuds, and barely registering the world around them. And somewhere amid that orchestrated chaos was Denise Atwater, a figure so routine that most didn't see her at all. She moved like a metronome, precise, silent, invisible. For over a decade, she had worked the early shift, wiping down conference tables before marketing teams poured in refilling hand soap in restrooms, before the first client pitched scrubbing fingerprints off lobby glass, before sunlight hit the chrome. To most, she was just part of the building's function, like the vents or the lights, always there or always ignored. That Monday morning was supposed to be no different, until Mandarin slipped from her tongue like a song. It happened beside the touchscreen lobby directory. An older Chinese gentleman, brows furrowed in confusion, stood poking at the screen. Denise's cart, parked a few feet away, had seen the lost look many times. Normally, she'd offer help in English and point. But when he mumbled in Mandarin, Denise responded instinctively, her words fluid and confident. Ninjiao Nagalotso, which floor are you looking for? She asked, her voice calm. The man blinked in surprise, then smiled, relieved. They exchanged a few words. She pointed to the elevators and gave directions. Just as he walked off, a delivery man with a clipboard approached her, this time in Spanish. Again, Denise didn't pause. Her voice shifted into perfect rhythm. Tercera sala a la izquierda. Ya lo entregaron esta mañana. Third room on the left. It was delivered this morning. A third bystander, a vendor, fiddling with mislabeled boxes, uttered a frustrated sentence in French. She turned to read the label and replied in clean, unaccented French, explaining the switch. No hesitation, no second guessing. And that was when Jonathan Kellerman stopped walking. He wasn't the kind of CEO who hovered. He believed in systems, not micromanagement. But as he exited the elevator from the executive garage, he caught a phrase in Mandarin. Sharp, elegant, not a rehearsed tourist phrasebook version, but native, nuanced human. That's what pulled him to a halt. That and the realization of who was speaking. Denise. He watched as she gracefully transitioned between languages, her tone adjusting, her body language, shifting subtly with each person. He squinted, replaying what he'd just witnessed. It wasn't translation, it was fluency, cultural agility, emotional intelligence in action. And it wasn't coming from HR or sales or his overpriced localization consultant. It was coming from the janitor with the burgundy uniform and the quiet eyes. By the time he stepped closer, she was wiping down the touchscreen again. Excuse me, he said. She turned, startled. Yes, sir. That was Mandarin, right? Yes, sir. You speak it fluently, yes. In Spanish? She nodded. Also French. Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, Swahili. And I read Latin, but I don't count that one. He stared. 9 languages. Yes, sir. No pride, no dramatics, just truth. Her badge said facilities support. But in that moment, Kellerman saw something else. Potential, power, precision. He had worked with international teams in 6 continents, hired interpreters who charged 400s an hour. And yet here stood Denise Atwater, a janitor, who could out-translate them all. "What's your name, Denise Atwater? I'd like to speak with you in my office." She hesitated, just a flicker of uncertainty, as if unsure whether this was opportunity or reprimand. But she nodded and followed. They rode the elevator in silence. "I've worked here for 13 years, she said softly. He looked over. "Never thought I'd be invited upstairs." He smiled faintly. "You might be surprised how fast things change." But even he didn't know just how much that change was about to rewrite everything they thought they knew about talent recognition and justice inside Halberg International. Upstairs, his assistant looked puzzled as Denise entered the executive suite. Kellerman didn't explain. He simply held the door to his office open and gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. She sat quietly surveying the space without awe, only awareness. Her eyes landed on a globe in the corner, a dusty plaque from a Brussels logistics summit, a framed photo of 2 girls likely his daughters. He sat across from her. "Denise," he began, "I need to ask you something, and I want the full truth." She nodded. He leaned forward. "How does someone like you, fluent in 9 languages, end up working here mopping floors?" There was no anger in his tone, just curiosity, a puzzle begging to be understood. She took a deep breath. "You got time for the truth?" He nodded. "Always." And with that, Denise began to share the journey no one had ever asked about until now. Denise leaned back slightly in the chair, her hands resting calmly in her lap, fingers interlaced. Her eyes didn't dart around the room like someone overwhelmed. Instead, she looked straight ahead at Kellerman, her face composed, her breath steady. "I was born in Toledo, Ohio." She began, her voice soft but assured. "Only child. My dad was a pipe fitter. My mom worked as a nurse's aide. They didn't have much, but they pushed education like it was the only ticket out." Kellerman listened not just with his ears, but with his whole posture. His elbows rested on the arms of his chair, his chin tilted slightly down in concentration. "I got a full ride to Kent State," she continued, "majored in linguistics. I love the science of language, how people connect, how cultures overlap in the way we speak. It made the world feel bigger, but also more understandable." She paused. "I was halfway through a master's degree, planning to go into international education or diplomatic translation." "What happened?" Kellerman asked, though he could already sense the turn in the story. Every brilliant hidden figure he'd ever met had a rupture point. "Life doesn't hide people like Denise without a reason." "My mom got sick," Denise said. "Cancer, aggressive. I came home to take care of her. She was all I had left. My dad had died of a stroke 6 months before, so I put school on hold. Then, everything sort of unraveled." She inhaled deeply, eyes flicking toward the large glass window behind him. The Dallas skyline stretched behind them in shimmering blues and silvers, but her mind was far from that view. "I had a baby. No partner who stuck around. No savings. No time. I worked whatever I could find, nursing homes, grocery stores, temp agencies. Eventually, a custodial supervisor here offered me a night shift position. The hours let me pick my daughter up from school and pay the light bill. So I stayed." Kellerman nodded. "But the languages, I never let them go," Denise replied, her voice gaining a subtle strength. "After I put my mom to bed, after my daughter fell asleep, I'd study. Borrowed textbooks from the library, downloaded podcasts, watched foreign news stations with subtitles. I even traded language lessons on online forums just to keep sharp. It kept me anchored, like I was still me." Kellerman blinked slowly. "That's extraordinary." Denise gave a faint smile. "It's survival. I didn't do it to impress anyone. I did it so I wouldn't disappear." A silence settled between them, heavy, not awkward. "Reverend, I think people forget," she said finally, "that janitors notice everything. We see who comes in early, who treats the receptionist with respect, who leaves conference rooms a mess, who talks too loud on their phone. And people forget we're there. That makes us witnesses. Kellerman leaned forward. And no one's ever asked you to tell your story. She shook her head. No one's ever really looked past the mop. He felt his chest tighten. For years, he'd signed policy memos about diversity, approved budgets for language training, hired consultants to evaluate organizational inclusion. But he'd never thought to look for brilliance in the maintenance logbook. "What's your daughter doing now?" he asked. Denise's smile warmed. She's a registered nurse, graduated from Texas A&M, paid her own way, worked nights, got scholarships. Stubborn like her mama. Kellerman smiled. "I'd love to meet her someday." "You'd like her," Denise said, the smile lingering. "She's the reason I keep going." There was a quiet confidence in her, the kind born from walking through storms without an umbrella and still arriving dry. She had nothing to prove but everything to offer. "I'm going to be blunt." Kellerman said, his tone shifting slightly as the executive in him resurfaced. "This company spends millions on international expansion, on cross-cultural outreach. And yet somehow the most capable person I've met in years has been working 2 floors below without anyone noticing." Denise didn't react. She simply waited. "I don't believe in coincidences," he continued. "I believe in missed opportunities. And I think this company's biggest one might be sitting in front of me." Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she said nothing. "I'd like to offer you a new role," he said. "Not tomorrow, not next year, now." Denise tilted her head. "What role? I don't know exactly what we'll call it yet. But it'll be executive level, something like cultural liaison for international affairs. Someone who understands not just language, but people, cultures, nuance. You'll work with our global partners, review contracts, help with expansion. You've already done half of it without trying." Denise stared at him. Not suspicious, but careful. "I don't have a college degree," she reminded him. "You have something better," he said. "Lived experience, talent, fire." She folded her hands again. "This isn't charity, right?" Kellerman shook his head. "No, this is overdue recognition." The two of them sat in stillness, 2 professionals from different journeys now standing at a shared threshold. And then, for the first time in a long time, Denise allowed herself to hope. Not cautiously, not conditionally, but fully. The next morning, Denise Atwater entered the building, not as the woman who cleaned floors, but as the company's newest executive. Yet the badge at the security desk didn't reflect her promotion. The receptionist, a young man in his 20s with slicked hair and AirPods in his ears, glanced at her uniform and waved her toward the service elevators. She paused. "I'm here to see Mr. Kellerman. I believe I'm expected." He looked up properly, this time confused. "Oh, just a sec." He typed something into his computer, eyes darting between the screen and her face. A small frown appeared and he muttered under his breath, "Weird." Then after a few moments, he stood up straighter. "Apologies, Miss Atwater. You've been added to the executive directory." Denise offered a polite nod and walked toward the main elevators, this time without the mop bucket trailing behind her. As the doors slid shut behind her, she exhaled softly. She could still feel the eyes following her. They weren't cruel, just curious. Curious and confused. How did she get that promotion? What department was she from? Was she part of HR's new diversity initiative? By the time the elevator reached the 12th floor, the buzz had begun. The whispers, the questions. She stepped off into a space she'd never entered except to mop quietly after hours. Polished floors, framed abstract art, a lingering scent of vanilla bean from the expensive candles Kellerman's assistant insisted on burning. Her office, modest but glass-walled, waited near the corner. A fresh plaque had been affixed to the door, or Denise Atwater Cultural Liaison, International Affairs. Denise stood before the nameplate, not smiling, not crying, just breathing. A memory flickered through her mind. Her first day mopping floors, staring at those glass walls, and wondering if she'd ever be seen beyond her name tag. Now her name was etched in steel. Inside the office, a welcome folder sat on the desk. company laptop login credentials, contact sheets for global partners. A small note in Kellerman's handwriting read, Day 1. Let's change a few things. She placed her worn janitor's badge into the top drawer, not to erase the past, but to remember it. Then she said, open the laptop and got to work. But not everyone welcomed the change. By lunch, the office was a minefield of murmurs. In the marketing department, 2 young assistants huddled by the printer. She cleaned the break room last week, one whispered. Now she's in charge of international stuff. Maybe she's someone's cousin, the other muttered. That or Kellerman's is trying to make a statement. Elsewhere in the legal department, a senior associate rolled his eyes during a call. Look, I'm not saying she's not smart, he said to his colleague, but we have people with MBAs waiting years to climb this ladder. She just skipped every rung. The skepticism trickled into Slack channels, into text threads, into veiled comments during meetings. Denise felt it. Not directly, but in the sidelong glances, in the delayed responses to emails, in the way certain department heads greeted her with tight smiles and clipped tones. But she didn't flinch. That afternoon, Kellerman invited her to sit in on a video call with a delegation from their Paris partner firm. The usual translator had fallen ill. Denise stepped in with ease, shifting from English to French with a rhythm and elegance that instantly shifted the room's energy. When a Parisian director made a dry joke about American punctuality, Denise responded with a retort that made the entire room laugh without breaking formality. After the call, Kellerman leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That, he said, is why you're here. Denise smiled politely. Just doing the job. He chuckled. You're redefining the job. Word spread. She wasn't just a janitor turned executive. She was good. Really good. But with respect came resentment. The next day, as she entered the lounge, she heard her name whispered behind the frosted glass of the HR suite. Phrases like fast-tracked optics and doesn't fit the mold floated through the air. One woman at the coffee machine, not realizing Denise had entered, muttered, I give her a month. Denise didn't respond. She just poured her coffee and left. But that night, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing documents from the German office, she paused. Her daughter Maya, now a nurse, placed a hand on her shoulder. You okay, Ma? Denise looked up. They don't think I belong. Maya smiled. They didn't think you belonged when you applied to college either. Didn't stop you. Denise chuckled softly. That's true. Besides, Maya said you're not here to belong. You're here to change what belonging means. The next morning, Denise walked into the office wearing a tailored navy blue blazer, a gift from Maya, and a confidence stitched not into fabric but into years of survival. She carried no defensiveness, only dignity. As she passed the HR suite again, the whisper stopped. People looked up. This time, no one dared say anything. By week's end, her name was known throughout the company, not just as a symbol, but as a force. A woman who had climbed from the basement to the boardroom without bitterness, without apology. And yet, as powerful as that ascent was, it was only the beginning. By the following week, Denise Atwater had settled into her new office, though settled was generous. Each day felt like walking through a museum where none of the paintings featured her story. She kept her head down, mastering reports, reviewing multilingual contracts, and sending corrections that legal had missed for months. But no matter how precise her work or fluent her communication, the air stayed brittle, heavy with resistance from those who didn't understand how she'd earned her place. Victor Torres, head of international operations, was the loudest silent opponent. He never questioned her directly, but his actions spoke volumes. Denise would receive meeting invites late or not at all. Emails requiring her input were sent to junior associates instead. She caught him more than once pretending not to see her in the hallways. One day after Denise submitted a memo outlining better language vetting for global marketing materials, he responded curtly, Noted. We'll have someone review it for tone. The irony was rich. She had corrected the tone of their global outreach. But the real problem was that her presence alone corrected everything Victor and his circle thought they understood about power. She wasn't alone, though. It started small. A younger analyst from procurement, Nia, stopped by her office to say, I read your memo. It helped me push back on a bad vendor contract. Just thanks. Later that week, a facilities manager named George, who had once worked beside Denise during overnight shifts, dropped by with coffee. You know you still walk like you're trying not to be noticed, he said with a grin. But they noticed, believe me. These moments of quiet encouragement kept her moving, but the undercurrent of resentment never left. Eleanor Craig, the board member who had flown in from Dallas, scheduled a second meeting with Kellerman. The timing was suspicious. It followed a particularly successful investor call where Denise's intervention had translated a Brazilian partner's hesitation into a verbal confirmation, one that would lead to a multi-million-dollar contract. The board had been watching, but not all of them were pleased. In the meeting, Eleanor didn't mince words. Jonathan, she said, tapping her manicured finger on the glass table, you've made a bold decision. But bold isn't always best for stability. This company runs on structure, tenure, professional pathways. What precedent are we setting by elevating someone with no formal credentials? Kellerman didn't flinch. We're setting a precedent that says talent matters more than titles. Eleanor tilted her head. So what's next? Promoting cafeteria workers to legal counsel. Jonathan leaned forward. If a cafeteria worker speaks 9 languages and can out-negotiate our existing team, I'll put their name on the next contract. Their eyes locked. She rose. Just remember, boards don't forget gambles, especially public ones. Word of that conversation never reached Denise directly, but she could feel it. In the sideways glances, in the hesitations before people spoke around her, in the invisible wall between her office and the inner circle. Then came the media call. A journalist from a national business journal reached out to the PR team after hearing a rumor a janitor had been promoted to an executive role at Halberg International. PR scrambled, unsure whether to spin it as a diversity win or shut it down completely. Kellerman brought it to Denise. What do you want to do, he asked. Denise thought for a moment. No interview, she said. Let the work speak first. But if you don't tell the story, someone else will. She nodded. Then we'll make sure that when they tell it, the facts back it up. That was Denise. Always anchored, never reactive. She had learned long ago that the only thing more powerful than speaking was performing with undeniable clarity. So she went to work harder than ever. She revised a pending deal with their German logistics partner in record time, uncovering a clause that would have cost the company nearly $700,000 in customs fees. She set up bi-weekly check-ins with the international teams in Morocco, Singapore, and Brazil, always speaking their native languages, always listening more than she talked. Inside, the company whispers began to change shape. She's good, someone in finance murmured during a break. Honestly, she found 3 translation errors no one caught in 2 years, another from compliance admitted. She doesn't even take credit, added a junior executive. She just fixes things. But still, the old guard waited for a slip, a misstep, something they could point to and say, see, we told you so. That moment never came. What came instead was an anonymous tip to the Internal Ethics Committee, a vague complaint about unqualified promotions and disruption to team morale. Denise wasn't named, but she was the obvious target. She was called in for an informal review. In the boardroom, facing 3 HR officers and a compliance manager, Denise sat calmly. Do you feel you're being treated differently since your promotion, one asked. She tilted her head slightly. Yes, but not in the way you're implying. Do you feel supported by leadership? I feel trusted by the one who made the decision. I can't speak for the rest. Do you believe your qualifications justify your position? She paused. If qualifications mean degrees and years of office politics, maybe not. But if they mean competence, fluency, discipline, and performance, absolutely. There was silence. When the session ended, Denise stood, thanked them for their time, and walked out with the same dignity she carried on the night shift. Later that evening, Kellerman stopped by her office. How'd it go? She shrugged. They asked questions. I gave answers. He nodded, then smiled faintly. I once heard the measure of leadership isn't how loud you shout, but how steady you stand when the shouting starts. Denise leaned back. Then I guess I'm already qualified. And she was more than anyone realized. By Friday morning, something had shifted, not in policy, not in the boardroom, but in the air between handshakes and break room chatter in the stiff corridors where hierarchy usually held its grip. A whisper had started making its way through Halberg International. Maybe she's not just a fluke. Maybe she's a force. That morning, Denise arrived early. She still took the same bus, still wore sneakers for her commute, and changed into her professional shoes once inside. Still nodded to the security guard who used to buzz her in for night shifts. But now when she entered the 12th floor, silence didn't follow her. Conversation did. Curiosity, respect, wariness too, but the kind people give to someone they know they'll soon answer to. On her desk, someone had anonymously left a book, The Multilingual Mind-Language Culture in the Brain. Inside was a sticky note, "Keep shaking the system." Denise smiled faintly. She didn't need to know who left it. She just knew she wasn't alone anymore. Her first task that morning was a call with the Zurich expansion team facing issues negotiating vendor rights with their Swiss-German partners. Denise joined the Zoom, introduced herself in fluent German, and began mediating with a kind of grace the team hadn't known they needed. Within 25 minutes, a stalled agreement that had lingered for 3 months was back on track. After the call, the Zurich liaison emailed Kellerman directly. Who is Denise Atwater? And how do we hire 5 more just like her? Meanwhile, Denise returned to the documents on her desk. One stack was marked priority, the other ignored. She'd created that second pile herself, a collection of international contracts, language inconsistencies, and cross-cultural blunders that had been quietly neglected for years because no one could or would deal with them. To her, this wasn't just cleanup, it was restoration. But as her influence grew, so did resistance. Victor Torres walked into her office uninvited that afternoon holding a folder. I need this translated and verified for the Morocco deal, he said, his tone clipped. Denise glanced up unfazed. This was due 3 days ago. He shrugged. It got buried. Now it's urgent. She took the folder without argument and flipped through the pages. It was riddled with regional inaccuracies and phrases that, if presented to Moroccan executives, would have come across as culturally tone-deaf. This needs a full rewrite, she said, not just a translation. Victor folded his arms. We don't have time for rewrites. Denise met his gaze. Then you don't have time to offend a major client. He didn't respond, just stood watching her as if unsure whether to fight or fold. She didn't wait for him to decide. She turned back to the document and started editing each keystroke, a quiet assertion of her place at the table. By late afternoon, Kellerman called her into his office. She walked in a notepad tucked under her arm, expecting another project briefing. But instead, he gestured to the couch by the window. Sit, he said. Denise raised an eyebrow. This sounds serious. Not serious, significant. She sat her posture as straight as ever. Kellerman leaned forward. We're launching the Voice Inside program next quarter, he said, and I want you leading it. Her mouth opened slightly. I thought you were still looking for candidates. We found one. She's already rewriting our culture. Denise was quiet for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the offer. You're giving me a full program, not giving. Trusting. She exhaled. I want interns, floor staff, temp workers. I want the overlooked. Kellerman grinned. That's exactly why you're the right person. Before she could respond, there was a knock on the glass. Kellerman's assistant entered holding a letter. From legal, she said. Marked urgent. Kellerman opened it and skimmed the contents. His brow furrowed. What is it, Denise asked. A follow-up from the board. They've requested a full review of all non-traditional hires made in the last 12 months. Denise leaned back. They mean me. Kellerman didn't deny it. They're pushing harder now, he said. Not all of them are sold. Denise nodded slowly. Then I'll show them the receipts. That night, Denise stayed late, going line by line through every contract she had revised, every deal she'd salvaged, every client she'd retained. She color-coded the results, annotated the improvements, created a report not to defend her worth, but to display it. By 11 p.m., she was the last light on the 12th floor. She stood at the window overlooking the quiet city. Her reflection stared back a woman no longer in a janitor's uniform, but with the same backbone that had carried her through decades of invisibility. This wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about proving what systems miss when they look away. The following Monday, the board assembled, not for Denise, but because of her. The quarterly leadership review had always been a routine affair, an exercise in metrics, market charts, and mild congratulations. But this one was different. Rumors had trickled upward, and not everyone on the board was comfortable with the pace or direction of change. The idea that a former janitor was now managing international affairs without a formal degree unsettled some of the company's more conservative stakeholders. Denise arrived 10 minutes early not to impress, but because early was how she had survived the corporate shadows all these years. Her outfit was simple but sharp charcoal blazer, silver hoop earrings, leather-bound notebook in hand. She stepped into the glass-walled conference room with the quiet assurance of someone who'd already navigated rooms far more hostile than this. Seated at the head of the table was Eleanor Craig, senior board member and unofficial queenmaker. She was flanked by two other longtime directors, both men in tailored navy suits, one fiddling with his Mont Blanc pen like it was a dagger waiting to be drawn. Kellerman stood at the far end near the digital display showing key quarterly data. When Denise entered only, he smiled. "Ms. Atwater," Eleanor said, glancing over the rim of her tortoiseshell glasses. "Thank you for joining us." Denise offered a slight nod. "Happy to." "Let's get straight to it," Eleanor said, clasping her hands. Several board members have expressed concern about the rapid elevation of a non-traditional candidate to a senior liaison role. We are requesting a performance justification. Not personal, purely procedural. Denise took a seat without flinching. "Then let's talk performance." She pulled a slim folder from her bag and slid it across the table toward Eleanor. "That's a breakdown of the Zurich, Sao Paulo, and Casablanca deals I've personally supported since taking the role. You'll find time-stamped call logs, amended contracts with language corrections and correspondence from 3 foreign delegations praising the clarity and professionalism of communication." Eleanor didn't touch the folder. "We've read summaries. Then you know the company saved $2.1 million in renegotiation clauses because of corrected translation errors that had lingered for years." The room went still. The director beside Eleanor glanced at the folder, then at Kellerman. "Is this accurate, verified by legal?" Kellerman said without hesitation. And Denise didn't just translate. She mediated cultural missteps our teams didn't even recognize. Eleanor, unamused, turned to Denise. "Why not pursue a traditional path? Finish your degree, intern apply through normal channels." Denise met her gaze calmly. "Because life didn't give me traditional paths. But it gave me grit, fluency, adaptability, and 20 years of observing how systems decide who gets seen." One of the board members leaned forward. "Let's not turn this into a social lecture. This is a business." Denise smiled faintly. "I agree. So let's talk business." She opened her notebook. "Since I joined this role, vendor attrition dropped by 18%. Client satisfaction among foreign partners rose by 23%. And for the first time in 5 years, Halberg cracked the top 10 list of culturally competent firms in the North American sector." Kellerman added, "These aren't soft numbers. These are impact metrics." The board was quiet, not convinced but off balance. Eleanor leaned back. "Still, we must consider precedent. What message does this send to long-standing employees? That excellence can come from anywhere," Denise answered. "And that if we're afraid of change," Kellerman added, "we'll lose talent faster than we ever realize." Eleanor's fingers drummed lightly on the table. "You're eloquent, Miss Atwater, but you must understand companies live on consistency." Denise's voice remained steady. then maybe it's time we redefined what consistency looks like. If it means overlooking brilliance because it wears the wrong shoes or arrives through the service elevator, then we're not consistent, we're complacent. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Eleanor slowly closed the folder. We'll issue a decision at the end of the quarter. Denise stood unshaken. Take all the time you need. I'll be over in Conference 3A cleaning up the mess we've spent years pretending didn't exist. She walked out, heels clicking softly, echoing down the corridor, not with arrogance, but with authority. In the hallway, Kellerman caught up. You didn't just survive that room, he said, you owned it. Denise exhaled. They weren't the toughest audience I've ever had. Still, he said, we might have more coming. She nodded. Then I'll keep showing them. Quietly, precisely. That afternoon, a message appeared on the company-wide Slack. A junior analyst named Tasha posted it under general updates with no context, just a quote. Some of the most valuable voices start in rooms no one pays attention to, until one day they echo loud enough to change the floor plan. Below it, dozens of emojis poured in. Fire, applause, light bulbs. Change wasn't coming. It had arrived, and her name was Denise Atwater. The following week, the atmosphere inside Halberg International felt different. It wasn't the kind of shift marked by banners or press releases. It moved like a breeze beneath office doors, a quiet recalibration of glances and whispered hallway conversations. Denise Atwater, once invisible, had become an unignorable presence. But as every seasoned professional knows, recognition rarely comes without resistance. She arrived early, as always. It wasn't strategy, it was habit, a carryover from years when being early meant the difference between being noticed or dismissed. Denise settled into her modest 12th-floor office. The plant on her windowsill, a gift from the finance intern she'd helped prep for a vendor call, leaned slightly toward the light. She adjusted its position, then turned to her inbox. Requests, invitations, updates, a team in Berlin asking for help, restructuring a multilingual presentation. A customer experience manager requesting a training session on cultural nuances. An internal memo from HR wanting her input on the company's onboarding language guide. She'd become, without planning, to a central conduit for communication. And for some, that was a problem. Down on the 10th floor in a private meeting room with glass walls and sleek furniture, a group of mid-level managers huddled around a tablet. On screen, the company's internal newsletter featured a section titled Employee Spotlight. Meet Denise Atwater, our cultural connector. There she was smiling modestly, dressed in the same charcoal blazer, the article summarizing her journey, her fluency in 9 languages, her impacts in stepping into her new role. So this is what we're praising. Now one manager scoffed, arms crossed. Don't say it like that, another said, though his tone lacked conviction. No, I mean it. I've got 2 MBAs on my team. They're still stuck in project analyst roles. But she skips the line because she speaks Swahili and used to clean floors. She didn't skip the line, the third manager said. She built her own. That silenced them briefly, but tension was building. Some feared Denise's rise meant an uncomfortable mirror was now hanging in the office, reflecting their own blind spots. Others were simply territorial. Denise, meanwhile, remained focused. At 10:15 a.m., she led a virtual training session for the North American support teams on communication etiquette in East Asian markets. She didn't lecture. She told stories like the time a client in Osaka nearly pulled a contract because a single word in an email mistranslated by AI implied insult rather than urgency. She showed how understanding tone, formality, and silence could build more than deals, it built trust. By the end of the call, the chat box was overflowing with thank yous, light bulbs, and praise. One junior rep wrote, "No one's ever explained it like this before. Please do more sessions." She smiled faintly, logged off, and took a deep breath. Her door knocked. It was Tasha, the junior analyst, nervous, clutching a notebook. "Sorry to bother you. Do you have 5 minutes?" Always, Denise said, gesturing to the chair. I just wanted to say, I've never had anyone in leadership who looked like me or came from, the ground floor. I know some people are talking behind your back, but others of us, we're rooting for you. Denise's face softened. Thank you, Tasha. That means more than you know. They talked briefly about an upcoming intern presentation. Tasha left with a plan and a spark in her eye. Moments like that fueled Denise. Not the spotlight, not even the title, but knowing that her mere presence made room for someone else's possibility. Yet not all feedback was so kind. That afternoon, she received an anonymous note in her inbox. No name, just a typed sentence, not everything that rises deserves to. Denise stared at it, not in shock, but in recognition. These were the ghosts that lingered in every system, cloaked in formality, armed with coded words. She didn't reply. She archived the message and made a mental note. A pattern was forming, and she intended to map it fully. Later that day, she joined Kellerman for a check-in meeting. I see you've been busy, he said, gesturing toward her notebook, now full of post-it flags and sticky notes. I've been tracking, she said. Feedback tone shifts departmental tensions. Backlash, she nodded. Quiet, but it's there. You give power to someone unexpected, and the system rattles. He folded his hands. You good? She nodded again. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be useful. Kellerman smiled. You're both. Before she left, he added, I'm putting your name forward for the Diversity and Leadership Advisory Council. I want this company's transformation to have a compass, and I think you're it. Denise didn't show surprise. Let them talk. Let them doubt. The work will speak louder. As she left his office, passing cubicles where murmurs had replaced eye contact, she felt neither intimidated nor vindicated. She felt ready. She'd weathered worse. But now the difference was, she was no longer fighting to be seen. She was the one holding the mirror. 3 weeks into her new role, Denise Atwater was invited to her first executive board meeting. The email arrived with no fanfare, just a calendar request titled Q3 Global Partnerships Strategy Review. Mandatory attendance. The sender, Kellerman's chief of staff. No personal note, no agenda details, no context. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. Then she saw the attendee list. Victor Dalton, Eleanor Craig, Carl Munoz, all long-standing executives with a reputation for guarded ambition. People whose handshakes felt like transactions and whose words were more code than communication. Denise accepted the invite. She didn't tell anyone, not even Kellerman. She wanted to walk into that boardroom like she belonged there, not because someone paved the way, but because she earned it. The morning of the meeting, she arrived early, dressed in a slate gray suit with soft brown accents and low black heels. Her hair was pulled neatly back. On the outside, she looked composed. Inside, a knot of nerves pulsed quietly at the base of her spine. She entered the executive conference room, polished oak panoramic windows, leather chairs lined around a table big enough to seat Parliament. Heads turned. Eleanor Craig, seated near the head, arched an eyebrow. Carl Munoz, CFO, flicked his eyes toward her nameplate before returning to his notepad. Denise offered a small nod, pulled out a chair at the side of the table, and placed her notebook in front of her. No one greeted her. No one offered water. The silence was deliberate. Kellerman arrived last. Morning, everyone. His voice cut the tension like glass. He offered a quick nod toward Denise before opening his laptop. Let's get started. For the first 30 minutes, the room buzzed with updates, projections, international logistics, delays in Morocco, a canceled summit in Dubai. Denise took notes, said nothing. She knew her time would come, and when it did, she had to be ready. Then Victor spoke. We've had persistent issues with language mismatches on vendor agreements, he said, especially in Brazil and Germany. We've had to pay outside consultants to clean up legal documentation again. Kellerman looked toward Denise. Ms. Atwater. Every head turned. She didn't flinch. I've already reviewed the contracts in question, she said calmly. The Portuguese documents contain idiomatic errors that change the intended obligations. Same with the German one's direct translations instead of legal equivalents. Victor frowned. You're saying you've already reviewed legal documents? Yes, I'm saying I corrected 3 of them. I also cross-referenced the invoice structures with our payment processing team to avoid overcharges due to misinterpretation. Eleanor Craig leaned forward. And what qualifies you to make those calls? Denise held her gaze. Linguistic and cultural fluency, plus 13 years of reading contracts nobody thought I could understand. Silence. Kellerman didn't intervene. Carl cleared his throat. Can you explain the German discrepancy? Denise opened her folder and passed a highlighted page across the table. Here, Leistungspflicht was translated as service preference. It actually means obligation of performance under German commercial law. That small error changes the legal enforceability of the entire clause. Carl examined the paper. She's right. The room shifted, just slightly, but enough. Victor glanced at his tablet, avoiding her eyes. Eleanor sat back in her chair, fingers tapping slowly. Ms. Atwater, Eleanor finally said, how do you see your role evolving here? Denise didn't hesitate. I see myself as a bridge between language culture teams. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to prevent multi-million-dollar missteps, build deeper partnerships, and make sure people feel seen, whether they're clients or interns. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, I'm fine with that. For a moment, Eleanor studied her like a painting she didn't know how to price. Kellerman broke the silence. Well said. I'd like Ms. Atwater added to the quarterly strategy review panel moving forward. Victor opened his mouth to object, closed it. Eleanor made no reply. The meeting adjourned 15 minutes later. As people filed out, Carl Munoz lingered behind. He approached Denise quietly. You know, he said, I speak Spanish fluently. Never heard anyone switch from Castilian to Latin American so effortlessly. Denise smiled. Depends on the audience. He grinned. Keep doing what you're doing. She nodded, then gathered her things. Back in her office, she sat down slowly. The knot of nerves had loosened, but something else had formed in its place, a quiet weight. Because she knew the room wouldn't stay neutral for long. The next time they'd come prepared. To question, to corner, to test. But that was fine. She wasn't done showing up. That afternoon, she received a visitor Bao, the shy Vietnamese intern. I heard you spoke up in the boardroom today, he said. I just did my job, she replied. He shook his head. No, you reminded them who really understands the world outside that window. Denise paused. Thank you, Bao. As he left, she wrote a single line in her notebook. Speak plainly, stand firmly, let the silence after you speak say everything. And just like that, the real work had begun. Denise Atwater sat alone in her office, the quiet humming of the air conditioning overhead, the only sound accompanying her thoughts. The boardroom exchange from that morning still echoed in her mind, not in words, but in the weight of glances, the texture of silence, and the shift in posture that occurred when power met presence. Her presence. She had entered that room a test. She had left a reckoning. But reckoning, she knew, came at a price. Outside her frosted glass door, conversations in hushed tones sprang to life whenever she passed. People paused mid-sentence, turned slightly away, or suddenly found their phones fascinating. No one said anything overt. No one needed to. Denise had learned long ago that backlash didn't always wear a mask of confrontation. Sometimes it wore a smirk, sometimes a whisper, sometimes nothing at all. The next morning, her email inbox was quieter than usual. No updates from departments she had offered to help. No follow-ups from Victor or Eleanor. Even the regular HR notices had vanished. Denise read the room digitally and in person. This was the slow freeze-out. The test after the test. When she stepped into the executive elevator, 2 mid-level managers already inside suddenly found something deeply interesting on their clipboards. They didn't look up, didn't speak. When she offered a calm, good morning, only the ding of the elevator responded. On the 12th floor, she emerged like smoke unacknowledged but impossible to ignore. Her desk bore no flowers, no memos, just a small stack of documents, vendor proposals needing translation, likely left without attribution. She flipped through them, all straightforward, nothing challenging, nothing that reflected the scope of her role. She understood. They wanted her visible but small, present but peripheral. She didn't flinch. Instead, Denise leaned into the work. She reviewed each contract with precision, correcting subtle errors in tone context and legal meaning. In one instance, a phrase in Arabic had been translated as obligatory request when in fact it meant mutual agreement, a difference that could have cost the company hundreds of thousands in breach penalties. She annotated it clearly and sent it back, no flourish, no signature line, just the truth laid bare in red ink. Later that day, she received a calendar invite for an informal team lunch. The subject line read, "Meet the new liaison." Denise tilted her head, feeling the faint tug of something off. It hadn't come from Kellerman. It hadn't even come from HR. It was from the regional marketing lead, someone she had spoken with only once in the hallway. She accepted. At noon, she walked into conference room B, where a dozen employees had already gathered. The air was thick with politeness, plastic smiles, and stiff greetings. At the center of the table was a catered spread of sandwiches and fruit trays. As she entered the room, briefly quieted, Denise took a seat at the far end, observing. "Glad you could join us," Denise, the organizer, said, voice too cheerful. "We thought it'd be good to, integrate." She nodded. "Appreciate the invite." But it was clear this wasn't a welcome. It was surveillance in the form of civility. Questions peppered her, most laced with edge. "So, 9 languages, that's impressive. Did you just pick them up? Do you feel like your unique background helps with cultural communication? How are you adjusting to this new level of responsibility?" Denise answered each with calm poise, never rising to the bait, never shrinking either. She knew the script. The questions weren't about learning, they were about poking holes. When the lunch ended, she thanked them, excused herself, and returned to her office. Hours passed. At 3:00 p.m., a file appeared in her inbox. A document labeled Proposal Internal Language and Culture Program. It wasn't hers. Yet the language mirrored her exact pitch to Kellerman 2 weeks earlier. Every bullet point, every phrase, even the name, the Voice Inside Initiative. There was no mention of her, no attribution. It had been scrubbed, rebranded, and passed off as a new idea by another department. Denise stared at the screen. For a few seconds, she felt the old burn, the one that used to boil inside her after a long shift when someone else took the credit, the recognition, the promotion. But she didn't burn this time. She saved the file, made notes, and drafted her reply. To Jonathan Kellerman, subject voice inside program attribution. Dear Mr. Kellerman, please find attached a proposal for an initiative identical in structure and language to the one we discussed, and I submitted for review. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding credit and ownership. I'm available to clarify. Best, Denise Atwater. She hit send, then stepped to the window and watched the city buzz below, cars inching forward, people moving briskly, unaware that in this building a quiet war for dignity was being waged. No one shouted, no one slammed a door, but lines were being drawn. Denise Atwater knew this world wouldn't surrender easily, not to credentials, not to performance, not even to results. But she wasn't here to fit in. She was here to change the room, one silent test at a time. The next morning, Denise arrived at the office earlier than usual. The air was cooler on the 12th floor before the hum of business began. Sunlight stretched across the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patches along the hallway carpet. Her shoes made no sound as she moved. She appreciated the silence not as absence but as clarity, a clean slate, a new decision. At her desk, the inbox blinked. No response from Kellerman yet, but she hadn't expected one so soon. Corporate power didn't always run on urgency. It ran on optics and silence until optics were threatened. Still, her message had been received. She reviewed her task list, translating 3 vendor summaries and submitting updated contract notes for the international team. As she prepared to draft a cultural onboarding guide for incoming staff from Tokyo, she heard it. A knock on her door. Not hesitant, not aggressive. Measured. She looked up. Jonathan Kellerman. "Good morning," he said, stepping inside. "Morning," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. He shut the door gently, pulled up a chair, and sat across from her, not behind a desk, not in the executive stance, just a man choosing to sit face to face. "I read your email," he said. She said nothing, only nodded. "It was disheartening to see," he added. "That proposal. The way it was lifted, word for word, it's unacceptable." Her eyes stayed steady. "I assume it's not the first time something like that's happened here." "No," he admitted, "but it might be the first time someone called it out and had the receipts." Denise folded her hands. "People don't usually think the janitor kept receipts." Kellerman let out a breath. "That's exactly the problem. Look, I won't pretend I know what it's like, but I do know this. What you're doing here is threatening to some people. Not because you're wrong, but because you're visible." "Visible isn't the same as valued," she said quietly. "No, but it's the first step," he replied. "And I want to make sure the next step happens correctly." He slid a folder across the desk. She opened it. Inside was a revised memo. Her name listed, first bolded, labeled Founder and Program Lead Voice Inside Initiative. "Company-wide announcement goes out this afternoon," he said. "I've asked HR and comms to handle the rest. You'll lead the rollout. Budget approvals, hiring mentors, setting training modules, it's yours." Denise studied the folder. "They'll push back harder." "They already are," Kellerman admitted. "But now they'll have to do it in daylight." Denise closed the folder, not out of fear, but with finality. She nodded once. "I'm ready." By mid-afternoon, the email went out. Company-wide. Subject line, "Elevating Internal Voices. Meet the new lead of our Diversity and Language Training Initiative." Screens lit up across floors. Executives paused in surprise. Some clicked, with confusion. Others, with grudging respect. The email contained a photo Denise framed in soft lighting, wearing a slate gray blazer and a silver necklace. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes told the story. Strength, certainty, command. The message was clear. She wasn't passing through. She was here to build. Within the hour, her office door became a revolving one. People knocking, not all warmly, not all comfortably, but knocking nonetheless. Some came with questions, others with congratulations, and a few with apologies wrapped in flattery. But the most unexpected visitor came at 3:17 p.m. Victor, the same international director who'd barely acknowledged her days earlier. He entered with a polite nod, holding a folder. "I owe you clarity," he said unprompted. Denise raised an eyebrow. He placed the folder on her desk. A vendor in Milan had been stalling negotiations. Language barrier and some legal fine print. "Your note corrected 3 terms we missed. The contract went through this morning." "I'm aware," she replied. I'm not great at these conversations," Victor said, shifting. "But I want you to know I respect what you're doing." Denise considered him for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused. "I didn't think someone like you, someone without the typical background, would handle this job." She tilted her head slightly. "Neither did you think someone like me would catch what your team missed." He looked at her, then nodded slowly. Touché. He left without another word. That evening, after most staff had gone home, Denise sat in the dimming light of her office, watching the skyline turn golden against the setting sun. Her phone buzzed. A text. From Kellerman. "You okay?" She typed back. "I'm good. This is just the beginning." "You sure you want to keep going?" She smiled to herself. "I've waited my whole life for this seat. I'm not standing now." Outside, the building's lights blinked on one floor at a time. But on the 12th, Denise sat alone, unshaken. A crack in the ice had formed. and this time it was spreading. The next morning, Denise Atwater entered the building through the main lobby, not the service entrance. She didn't do it to prove a point. She did it because it was her building too now. Her ID badge beeped confidently at the glass security gate. A new sound, a chime of acknowledgement, not just access. As she walked across the polished floor, heads turned. Some in admiration, some in curiosity, some in quiet disapproval. The whispers didn't unsettle her anymore. She'd learned that most storms began with murmurs, but today's whispers weren't ordinary. In the elevator, a young assistant nervously glanced at his phone, then at her, then back at his phone again. When Denise stepped off at the 12th floor, she passed a few open offices. Eyes followed her. Then came the moment. A ripple. HR had posted the official organizational chart update right there in the glass hallway outside the executive meeting room. A small bulletin board, often overlooked, now pinned with laminated sheets. At the center, a flowchart of names and departments. Denise Atwater. New position listed, executive lead, global culture and internal development. A solid reporting line drawn directly to CEO Jonathan Kellerman. Below it, three dotted lines, liaisons to HR, international operations, and corporate strategy. For the first time in company history, someone without a traditional degree, someone who had spent over a decade as invisible labor, was positioned above multiple department heads. And that was when the ice began to crack again. In the break room, Tanya from HR slammed her coffee cup a little too hard onto the counter. "I'm sorry," she snapped, voice sharp, "but does anyone else find it absurd that someone who doesn't even have a LinkedIn page is now leading international strategy?" Victor across the room stirred his coffee slowly. "She's effective," he said without looking up. Tanya huffed. "So is a dictionary. Doesn't mean I'd make it the CEO. Chuck, a marketing manager, leaned in. "I mean, she was scrubbing floors last month." "Let's be real. What kind of message does that send?" Victor finally looked up. "That we've been looking in the wrong direction for too long." Silence. Awkward. Heavy. No one spoke after that, but the storm had already begun to brew. Meanwhile, Denise was in conference room B, seated with a delegation from the Tokyo office. 3 suits, 2 translators, and a stack of proposals. But no one needed the translators. Denise handled it all delicately, precisely in fluent Japanese. She paused only once to pour tea. Small, deliberate actions. A practiced bow of her head, a respectful use of familial honorifics. Not overperformed, just deeply appropriate. At the end of the meeting, one of the executives bowed deeply and handed her a handwritten letter of gratitude. "Your presence," he said in English, "restores balance, harmony." Denise nodded graciously, then walked them out herself. By the time she returned to her office, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She picked up. "This is Denise." A pause, then a cool, clipped voice. "Miss Atwater, this is Eleanor Craig. I'd like a moment of your time." Denise stood a little straighter. "Of course. I'll be in conference room 17C in 10 minutes. When Denise arrived, Eleanor was already seated. No papers, no assistants, just a tablet and her old-school steel fountain pen. She gestured for Denise to sit. Denise did calmly, not stiffly. "You've stirred up quite a lot, Miss Atwater." Denise folded her hands. Progress tends to do that. Eleanor's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Do you know what I've learned from 3 decades in this business? That competence is threatening," Denise offered dryly. Eleanor let out a faint breath. "That power rarely announces itself. It waits, observes, and then corrects." Denise said nothing. "You've impressed people," Eleanor continued, "and ruffled others. Kellerman's moved to elevate you directly. He's staking his credibility. Then he believes in the right thing. Or he's gambling on headlines," Eleanor said. Another pause. "You've made yourself useful." "No doubt," she added, "but people are whispering. People who matter." Denise didn't blink. "Let them whisper. I'm not here for comfort. I'm here for change," right there. Eleanor looked at her more closely now, measured, evaluating. Finally, she nodded once slowly. Then brace yourself, Miss Atwater, because change never comes quietly. And this building wasn't made to be quiet. Denise left the room with her head high. She wasn't rattled. She was warned. And that was just fine. Warnings were a kind of respect, an admission that you were now a factor. That afternoon, while others huddled in offices spinning theories, Denise drafted a new internal proposal, one that Kellerman hadn't even asked for. A quarterly language and cultural immersion course taught by employees, janitors, admins, floor staff, the invisible ones. She titled it Voice Inside Listening Where We've Never Heard. And this time she didn't wait for approval. She submitted it to HR, copied to Kellerman, and CC'd Eleanor Craig. If they wanted to whisper about her, she'd give them a reason to raise their voices instead. The email landed in inboxes at 6:47 a.m. sharp. Subject voice inside. A new initiative from D. Atwater, Executive Lead. Global Culture and Internal Development. CCJ Kellerman, CEO, Charles E. Craig, Senior Board Member, HR Leadership. The message was short, clear, and impossible to ignore. Denise had outlined the structure of her new program, an internal talent development and cultural immersion series that would be led by frontline staff across departments. Each quarter, employees who spoke a second language or who had cultural expertise would share their experiences, skills, and insights with cross-functional teams. There would be no lectures, no PowerPoint slides, just real people telling real stories, showing what real talent looked like when it wasn't dressed in suits or hung with degrees. The tagline hit like a thunderclap because brilliance doesn't always wear a badge. By noon, HR was flooded with responses, some enthusiastic, some skeptical, and more than a few deeply uncomfortable. In cubicles and Slack threads, people whispered, was this going to be mandatory? Who approved this? Was Kellerman really behind it, and yet something shifted? At 1:30 p.m., Denise held the first open invite session in the newly renamed Atwater Room. The walls still smelled faintly of paint. The plaque was freshly mounted. Only 8 people showed up. One was Bao, the shy intern. Another was Alicia from Facilities, who spoke fluent Tagalog and was always mistaken for just the janitor's niece. A third was security guard Marcus James, who held a master's in Eastern philosophy but had never mentioned it during employee orientation. They each introduced themselves. Each story echoed Denise's own. The quiet beginnings, the brushed-aside resumes, the language skills mistaken as trivia, the dreams slowly compacted under routine. Denise didn't open the session with a speech. She opened it with a question. When was the last time someone asked what else you could do? Silence. Then Marcus raised his hand. Never. Across the building in the executive suite, Kellerman was watching. He didn't sit in on the session. He didn't need to. He saw the RSVP list, saw the comments start to pour in through internal chat. This might actually work. Never thought I'd want to attend a meeting led by facility staff, but damn, Denise has me rethinking everything. Finally, someone's not just talking about inclusion, they're building it. By the end of the week, Voice Inside had 37 signups for the next rotation. Bao volunteered to lead a Vietnamese English session in 2 weeks. A Ukrainian lunchroom attendant named Oksana offered to talk about communication gaps in healthcare access and how cultural missteps cost patients their lives. Denise met with each volunteer individually, not to coach them, but to listen, to tell them, you belong here, not just at the table, but at the head of it. She created laminated name badges for each speaker, not janitor, not assistant, not admin, just their names. And beneath one word in gold, educator. But not everyone embraced the change. In a private meeting, Victor from International Operations raised his concerns with Eleanor Craig. She's rewriting the way we do leadership development, he said, his tone tight. Without clearance, without oversight, we have a system for a reason. Eleanor listened quietly. She's gaining followers, he added. People are quoting her in meetings, even referencing her emails as if they're policy. Eleanor finally spoke. Is the program creating value? Victor hesitated. It's engaging staff. Morale seems up. Then what's the problem? He didn't answer right away. It's a disruption. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Victor, let me be clear. If disruption results in progress, it's called innovation. And if you're threatened by that, perhaps you should examine whether you've been leading or just preserving. He blinked. You're dismissed, she said flatly. Victor left the room with a knot in his chest. Later that day, Denise received a short note in her inbox. From E. Craig, subject revoice inside. Denise, well played. Let me know what you need for phase 2. EC. Denise stared at it for a moment, lips pressing into the faintest smile. She hadn't asked for permission, but now she had the green light to go further. Phase 2 rolled out 2 weeks later. Intranet banners, registration links. Voice Inside became a company-wide initiative with sponsorship across 3 departments. It wasn't about diversity optics. It was about untapped excellence. From the ground floor, janitors, baristas, admins, drivers, IT night shift techs, every session filled, every seat occupied. People leaned in, listened, questioned, learned, and slowly the air inside Halberg International began to change. Denise kept a photo of her old uniform folded in her drawer. Next to it, a sticky note that simply read, "Remember what silence cost you, then teach them to listen." She wasn't waiting for applause. She wasn't waiting to be liked. She was building a system where no one else had to climb through invisibility to be seen. And this time she was just getting started. By the 3rd month of Voice Inside, the program had evolved beyond anyone's expectations, even Denise's. What began as a quiet effort to spotlight overlooked workers became a movement, not just a company initiative, but a cultural correction. The Atwater room, once used for dull PowerPoint briefings, had transformed into a space of possibility. Every Friday afternoon, without fail, it buzzed with new voices, stories, and skills the executive floor had never thought to value. On this particular Friday, a man named Elias took the stage, a 61-year-old maintenance technician with calloused hands and quiet eyes. No resume highlights, no leadership credentials, just 27 years of service and 5 fluent languages, including Russian and Farsi. He'd never spoken in front of more than 3 people before. But today, 50 employees, including 3 senior managers and Kellerman himself, sat in that room hanging on every word. I was a professor in Tehran, Elias began softly. Before everything changed, I cleaned buildings so my grandchildren could eat. But I never stopped reading, never stopped translating books on my lunch breaks. Murmurs filled the room. By the end of his talk, the entire front row stood to applaud, some with wet eyes. That's when Denise knew this wasn't just a wave. It was a tide, and tides change everything. Meanwhile, upstairs, tensions brewed. Some longtime managers bristled. Not at the program itself, they couldn't argue with its numbers. Retention was up. Productivity had climbed 4.2%. Cross-department engagement had tripled. But what unsettled them was who now had access to influence. You can't just hand the floor to janitors and cafeteria staff, one department head whispered to another during a leadership lunch. This is corporate, not a community center. But their voices, once the only ones in the room, were now being drowned out by something stronger: truth, empathy, and results. Back in her office, Denise began preparing the slate for Q2. She read every application personally. There was Jamie from payroll, who'd spent years helping her immigrant neighbors navigate U.S. tax law in Korean. Marta, a cafeteria worker who'd organized her village's microfinance cooperative back in Guatemala. And Charles, a security guard and retired Marine who had spent the last 5 years quietly helping veteran interns adjust to civilian work life. Every story was a revelation. Denise kept a spreadsheet, not of their skills, but of what the company had nearly missed. She titled it Untapped Gold. Kellerman had started sending personal thank you notes to each speaker, handwritten, short, thoughtful. He didn't do it for show. He did it because Denise reminded him that respect begins with noticing. And he was noticing everything now, especially the quiet ones. Still, not all attention was welcome. A viral LinkedIn post by a visiting vendor called Denise the Quiet CEO, praising her initiative as the most human-centered program they'd seen in 2 decades. The post got 82,000 likes. The comments exploded. Suddenly, media requests started flooding PR, magazines, podcasts, morning shows. Denise declined them all. She wasn't building a brand. She was rebuilding a culture. And cultures don't need headlines. They need foundations. One afternoon, Kellerman walked into the Atwater room unannounced. It was mid-session, but Denise motioned for him to take a seat. A 22-year-old warehouse clerk named Lila was at the podium explaining how her TikTok series teaching American Sign Language had reached 1.6 million views. She finished with a simple truth: I was never hired for my brain, just my back. But this room made me realize I don't have to pick between both. The applause was thunderous. Kellerman clapped hardest of all. After the session, he pulled Denise aside. You realize what's happening, right? She tilted her head. You're rewriting corporate education. Denise gave a soft smile. No, I'm just giving it back to the people it forgot. That evening, she stayed late. In the quiet of the Atwater room, she stacked chairs and wiped down the table, same as she had hundreds of times in other rooms in other jobs. But this time it felt different. She wasn't cleaning up after someone else's meeting. She was preparing the ground for the next voice, the next story, the next light hidden in the shadows. As she packed her bag, she noticed a small envelope tucked into her desk drawer. No name, just 2 words on the front: for you. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of the Atwater room. Simple lines charcoal on cream cardstock. And on the wall of the drawing in childlike handwriting were the words, "This room helped my mom believe she matters. Thank you." Ellie, age 9, Denise sat down. She didn't cry. She just let the silence hold her for a moment. Because sometimes silence isn't absence. It's acknowledgement. And sometimes it's enough. Across the building floors buzzed with talk, of language, of heritage, of hidden gifts. And at the center of it all was one woman who never asked for power, never demanded recognition. She simply built a room and invited the world to listen. The Monday after Ellie's note, something shifted, not just in the building's energy, but across Halberg International's entire ecosystem. Word had spread that Denise Atwater, the once anonymous janitor turned cultural liaison, had ignited more than a talent initiative. She had created a movement. It began with a call from Berlin. The regional director for Halberg Europe requested a one-on-one meeting with Denise, not Kellerman, not legal, not HR. Her. We'd like your input on integrating local dialects into our vendor onboarding, the message read. Word is you've done something revolutionary. Denise chuckled at the word revolutionary. She wasn't leading a revolution. She was just doing what she always had: listening, translating, and making people feel seen. But revolutionary or not, the interest didn't stop there. By midweek, 3 global partners, Seoul, Cape Town, and Toronto, had asked to implement Voice Inside chapters in their regions. Not pilot programs, full rollouts. The company's internal systems team had already begun designing multilingual onboarding interfaces inspired by Denise's field notes. Meanwhile, the Atwater room had become sacred ground. A previously unused corner of the 12th floor now housed laminated cards bearing the words, "This space is for the unseen, the unheard, and the underestimated. Speak freely. Be recognized." Every Friday, Denise hosted Open Table, an informal lunch where anyone from interns to executives could drop in, speak in their native tongue, and share stories over sandwiches and orange soda. It was standing room only. Even Victor, the stiff executive from international operations, who once dropped a folder on her desk without so much as a nod, came in once and listened for a full hour. He didn't speak. But he stayed until the end, and on his way out, he quietly left behind a Turkish proverb scribbled on a post-it: "A silent guest hears the most." But outside the Atwater room, not everyone was celebrating. In the legal department, Denise's success became a sore spot for one senior associate, Peter Langdon. Peter was slick, Ivy League educated, and known for his polished briefs and subtle disdain for anyone who didn't come up the traditional way. "She's inspiring," he said with a tight smile at a networking mixer. "But let's be honest, no resume, no credentials, no certifications. This is a PR stunt gone too far." He wasn't the only one thinking it. A quiet faction of senior staff had begun referring to Denise's rise as the Atwater anomaly, a rare exception, not a replicable model. They couldn't outright oppose the movement. It had too much public goodwill. But they could and did begin creating invisible walls. Meeting invites that mysteriously omitted her name. Project briefings that conveniently never made it to her inbox. Memos with buried footnotes requiring legal review only Peter could grant. The system that had once overlooked her now tried to engulf her in bureaucracy. Denise felt the resistance like a draft through a cracked window. Nothing was overt. That was the brilliance of institutional pushback. It smiled while it closed doors. Still, she refused to shrink. Instead, she documented everything. Meeting times, missed invites, notes mysteriously missing her name. Then she did something no one expected. She asked for a meeting with the board of directors. Kellerman was the first to object. "That's high risk," he told her. "They're old school. They may not see what you see." Denise didn't flinch. "That's why I need to talk to them." The request was approved. And 1 week later, she stood at the far end of the oak-paneled boardroom, flanked by portraits of past CEOs, none of them women, none of them black. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, her old janitor badge tucked in her purse for courage. No slides, no talking points, just her. She began not with data, but with a story. 14 months ago, she said, "I helped a lost tourist find the right elevator using 3 different languages." No one noticed. She paused. "But now that I'm in a glass office, everyone wants to talk about what I've done. What's changed isn't me, it's your proximity." She let the silence settle. "I didn't get smarter when I got this title. I got seen. How many more are still invisible?" Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Then she dropped the final note: "I've logged 26 instances in the last 3 months where critical communication errors between departments cost this company over $400,000 in misfiled documents, delayed contracts, and vendor fallout. All fixable with people you have already hired if only someone had asked them what they knew." That got their attention. One director leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" Denise exhaled slowly. "Make voice inside a requirement, not a side project. Integrated into leadership pathways. Talent should never be discovered by accident, and brilliance shouldn't need to scrub floors for a decade before being taken seriously." The room went quiet again. But this time it was a good quiet, the kind that comes before change. Outside the boardroom, a nervous intern paced. Denise emerged with her head high, face unreadable. When the intern handed her a notepad and asked, "How'd it go?" she simply smiled. "Better than expected." She turned the corner and headed back to her floor, where 100 more voices were waiting for their own turn to be heard. Ready for part 16. Ban deny yes, ChatGPT deny part 6C. A ripple through the walls, 850 words. The board meeting had barely concluded, but its aftershocks reached every department like a low, insistent tremor. Within 24 hours, an internal memo circulated from the Office of Strategy and Transformation. The subject line was clear: Talent Visibility Initiative Phase 1 Rollout. And under the bullet points, one phrase stood out in bold model, adapted from Denise Atwater's Voice Inside framework. It was no longer a pilot, it was a blueprint. The very next morning, Denise found herself on the executive calendar, 3 slots booked back-to-back by departments that once pretended she didn't exist. Marketing, logistics, Legal. Peter Langdon didn't make an appointment. He called her assistant and left a terse message. She can stop by when she has time. Denise declined, politely. I'm fully booked this week, she told her assistant. But if Mr. Langdon would like to email his questions, I'm happy to prioritize them by urgency. She wasn't being petty. She was being efficient, the way they always said she needed to be. Upstairs, Kellerman smiled when he heard. She's already running this place better than half my VPs, he muttered. Half joking, half not. But Denise wasn't after applause. She was after permanence. And that required more than a viral moment or a few brave speeches. It meant building scaffolding beneath her success so others could climb it too. So she returned to where her story began, the service level. She walked the corridor where carts clanged and fluorescent lights buzzed. She greeted every cleaner, security guard, cafeteria worker by name. They blinked, smiled awkwardly, not quite sure how to address her now. Ms. Atwater, some ventured. Denise, she corrected gently. Always Denise. One woman, Maria Alvarez, paused while refilling the vending machine. I heard about the board meeting, she said in Spanish. You spoke for all of us. Denise nodded. Then it's only right I come back to listen. She wasn't on a press tour. She was gathering fuel. That Friday, she invited 10 employees, none of them executives, to an early morning roundtable in the Atwater room. A nurse from the wellness office, a night security guard, 2 cafeteria servers, a temp from accounting, and yes, 3 janitors. She opened with a simple question. If you could fix one thing about how this place sees you, what would it be? For the first few minutes, silence. Then words trickled in. I'd want the managers to stop assuming I can't speak English just because I work nights. I'd like someone to ask what I studied before I came here. I don't need a promotion, I need respect when I raise a concern. Denise wrote every word down, no recording device, just ink and intent. At the end, she said, this is the real boardroom, and this conversation doesn't stop today. Word got around. By Monday, she had to split the sessions into 3 groups, then 5. Then HR called asking if they could attend. No, she said, not yet. She wasn't ready to let the machine co-opt the message, not until she finished building the message's foundation. In private, Kellerman asked if she wanted to formalize the series, make it a department-wide program, hire a coordinator, add reporting tools, publicize the work. Denise shook her head. Structure's good, but right now this needs to stay human, one chair, one voice at a time. She wasn't anti-system. She just knew that systems are only as honest as the people maintaining them. And right now, too many still look the other way when silence cloaked injustice. So she kept listening. She returned to the Moroccan team, revised onboarding in Arabic. She met with the Filipino maintenance crew, helped translate benefits paperwork in Tagalog. She started a bilingual mentorship channel on Slack where staff could connect across languages, not titles. And every day she added new pins to the world map behind her desk, not to mark countries, but conversations. Proof that the world already lived within Halberg's walls, it just hadn't been asked to speak. But Denise wasn't naive. She knew change invites resistance. A week after the memo, a rumor floated through the building that she was planning to restructure the hiring funnel, remove degree filters from entry-level roles. It wasn't true, at least not yet, but still the backlash came. A cluster of anonymous complaints were filed to HR unqualified, token promotion, playing identity politics. She read each one, then filed them under a folder she labeled evidence of impact, not bitterness, documentation. She didn't respond. She responded by continuing. One evening, long past sunset, she lingered at her desk. The building was nearly empty. Her lamp cast soft golden light on a sea of open files and hand-scribbled notes. She picked up her old janitor badge again. Not for nostalgia, but as armor. The knock came softly. It would bow the intern. You busy as always, she smiled. Come in. He sat quietly for a moment. There's something I've been thinking about. You said people didn't see you until the elevator ride with Mr. Kellerman. What if he hadn't heard you that day? She looked at him, then back at the badge. Then I'd still be mopping floors, she said, but I'd still be fluent in 9 languages. Still ready. Bao nodded. So, what should I do? Denise leaned forward. Speak, even if no one's listening yet, because one day someone will, and when they do, you better be ready. The lamp flickered once as if nodding. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, history was still being rewritten. The following week began with a strange buzz in the building. It wasn't Denise's name this time, it was a document. An anonymous internal memo had been uploaded to the company's shared drive. No signature, no timestamp. Just the title, The Voice You Refuse to Hear, a report on systemic blindness at Halberg International. Within minutes, it had been downloaded over 300 times. The document was 14 pages long, not inflammatory, not dramatic, just undeniable. It opened with a quote, "Talent ignored becomes resentment. Resentment left unaddressed becomes rot." The first section outlined 5 case studies of employees who had been quietly passed over for roles they were qualified for, 3 of whom had eventually left for better opportunities elsewhere. The second section cross-referenced hiring data from the past 8 years, highlighting an unmistakable trend. 82% of promotions went to candidates from 3 private universities, and 95% of managerial roles were filled internally, yet rarely from departments deemed non-professional, like maintenance, food service, or custodial support. The final section was a quiet indictment. A system doesn't need loud injustice to be unjust. It only needs silence in the face of truth. Denise received the memo before lunch. Someone had slid a hard copy under her office door. She read every word twice. She didn't know who had written it, but she recognized the voice behind it, someone like her. Someone watching, someone fed up with waiting for change. And the timing couldn't have been more precise. That afternoon, she was scheduled to meet with Halberg International's Strategic Expansion Committee, a group of 12 executives, mostly older, mostly men, tasked with advising the board on future growth opportunities. They didn't want her input. She had been invited as a formality, a box to check. But Denise didn't show up with silence. The boardroom on the 21st floor was made of glass and pretense. A long oval table dominated the room, flanked by tall back chairs that had supported countless forgotten voices. Denise entered calmly, the anonymous memo in one hand and her leather-bound notebook in the other. As she sat, murmurs floated around her, casual greetings from people who still underestimated her. Then Kellerman entered last, carrying his own copy of the memo, brows furrowed, eyes sharp. "Before we begin," he said, placing the document in the center of the table, "I want to address this." One of the execs, Greg Morrison from finance, leaned forward. "We don't entertain anonymous whistleblowing." "It's not a whistle," Denise interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "It's a mirror, every head turned. You can ignore the name, but you can't ignore the truth." Kellerman didn't speak. He watched. Denise opened her notebook. Page 7, there's a list of roles filled without interviews. Page 9, proof that HR stopped forwarding custodial employee resumes for lateral transfers. Someone cleared their throat. "I've spent the last 4 weeks in departments. None of you have visited in years," she continued. "I've met polyglots pushing laundry carts, veterans working cafeteria lines, and finance interns cleaning toilets on weekends. You want expansion. Start with the people you refuse to see." The silence in the room was thick, but not hostile. "Not yet." "What's your point?" Ms. Atwater asked Ellen McCready, the VP of Strategic Partnerships. "My point," Denise said, "is that no system grows stronger by ignoring its roots. And right now, this place has roots deeper than you think. Roots that speak 10 languages, raise families, and show up every day without recognition." Kellerman folded his arms. "So what do you suggest?" Denise closed the notebook. "You don't just fix this with a campaign or a banner. You change the culture by changing what counts as leadership. You invest in the invisible. You start asking questions no one wants to answer, especially about who gets seen and who gets sidelined. A beat. Then surprisingly, Morrison spoke again, this time quieter. So what does that look like specifically? Denise tapped the memo. Start by funding the Voice Inside program. Fully, not as a PR stunt, as a pipeline. Remove degree filters from entry roles that don't require them. Create rotational pathways from non-desk jobs into mentorship roles. And if someone speaks 3 languages, don't wait until it's convenient to notice. The room shifted, not in revolution, in recalibration. For a few seconds, Denise saw something she hadn't expected in that glass and steel chamber openness. By evening, the internal memo had been formally acknowledged by leadership. Kellerman issued a brief internal statement. We have reviewed the concerns raised and are taking them seriously. Our future must be built on talent, not titles. More to come. But it wasn't the statement that shook the building. It was what happened next. The CEO invited every employee who had downloaded the memo to a voluntary listening session. The next week, no managers, no hierarchy, just voices. Denise walked back to her office with the original hard copy tucked into her bag. Whoever had written it had cracked something open. Later, as she was leaving the building, she passed by Bao, the intern. He grinned shyly. She tilted her head. Something funny. He shrugged. Just proud. She smiled back. Me too. But in her heart, she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much louder silence. The days following the anonymous memo and Denise's bold appearance before the Strategic Expansion Committee sent ripples through Halberg International like never before. While some departments embraced the shakeup, others recoiled. It was as if the company had been split in two, those inspired to evolve and those determined to maintain the status quo. And the resistance didn't hide for long. It started in whispers, comments exchanged in side hallways, sarcastic chuckles in break rooms, and pointed emails from middle managers asking for clarification on the new direction. By Friday, it escalated into action. One of the training leads, Carla Jennings, sent out a revised orientation agenda to all department heads. The updated program removed the Voice Inside session Denise had created and replaced it with a generic module titled Pathways to Success, Corporate Structure, and You. When Denise saw the change, she calmly walked down to Carla's office on the 14th floor. The hallway was lined with portraits of past executives, all of them white and all men. Denise knocked once and entered without waiting. Carla looked up from her monitor. Denise, everything okay? Denise held out the printed agenda. Why was this changed without discussion? Carla adjusted her glasses, her expression shifting. I thought it best to keep things streamlined. Your session is valuable but perhaps too niche for company-wide training. Niche, Denise repeated, her voice measured. Uplifting internal talent is niche. Carla leaned back in her chair. Let's be honest, Denise. Not everyone is thrilled about the direction things are going. It's making people uncomfortable. Your background, while inspiring, isn't exactly replicable. Denise stared at her for a long moment. And that's why it matters. Carla stood. Look, it's nothing personal. We're just trying to avoid a culture war inside the company. Denise folded the agenda in half and slid it into her bag. You're not avoiding a culture war. You're prolonging one. Then she turned and walked out. That afternoon, Kellerman stopped by her office. I heard about Carla's change, he said. You okay? I'm fine, she replied. But I'm not letting them erase what we're building. He nodded. You won't be alone in this. I've already reinstated your session and made it mandatory for all new hires. But I need a favor. Denise raised an eyebrow. A favor? He handed her a list, 12 names. These are employees who've shown interest in the program. I want you to meet them, hear their stories, build the foundation from the ground up. She studied the list. A cafeteria supervisor, a night shift security guard, an IT support tech, an intern from HR. Names that had never crossed a boardroom table. You're asking me to be the bridge, she said. I'm asking you to help us burn the old map and draw a new one. Denise nodded. Then we start now. Over the next week, Denise met every single person on that list. Not in her office, but in their spaces. The loading dock, the print room, the basement level kitchen. She didn't invite them into the executive world. She stepped into theirs. One of the most powerful meetings happened on Tuesday evening. Angela Rosario, the head of evening custodial staff, met Denise in the break room after clocking out. She was in her 50s, her hair in a tight bun, arms crossed as if expecting a lecture. "You wanted to talk?" Angela asked skeptically. "I wanted to listen," Denise replied. "What's it been like working?" Here Angela eyed her for a beat, then shrugged. "I come in, I clean, I go home. That's the deal. No one ever asked what else you can do." Angela let out a short laugh. "Girl, I speak 2 languages, raised 3 kids, run a side bakery, and trained half this staff when they were new. But they only see the mop." Denise smiled. "I see more." Angela softened slightly. "You're different, but different doesn't last long around here." Denise leaned forward. Maybe it never did because it never had backup. Word spread fast that Denise was making rounds, real rounds, not symbolic ones. And while some managers grumbled, others began watching more carefully, wondering if they too had overlooked brilliance in plain sight. But not all reactions were positive. Late Thursday night, Denise received a text from Bao the intern. "FYI, there's talk of restructuring. Some senior staff say your role might be redundant. Watch your back." Denise stared at the message for a long time. She wasn't shocked, but she was tired. Not tired from the fight itself, tired from the way resistance always wore a smile. She walked to the office printer and quietly began making copies, files, emails, agendas, testimonies from her visits, metrics on improved partner relations since she took the role. She didn't raise her voice. She raised her documentation. By Friday morning, she submitted a full report to Kellerman titled "Retention Through Recognition, a Ground-Level Leadership Pipeline." It detailed not only the program's success, but a roadmap for how Halberg could evolve without sacrificing culture or competence. The final sentence read, "If you want to lead the future, you must first see who's already standing in it." That day, she received an unexpected visit. Eleanor Craig. She stepped into Denise's office, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I read your report," she said. Denise looked up. "And you're forcing this company to look inward. Not everyone will thank you. I'm not asking for thanks." Eleanor studied her for a moment. Then she nodded once and left without another word. As the door closed, Denise exhaled. The winds were shifting again. The resistance was growing louder, but so was the movement. And this time it wasn't anonymous. 3 weeks after Denise submitted the pipeline report, the tremors finally reached the top. Halberg's quarterly partner summit, a lavish 2-day event filled with keynote speakers, global investors, and diplomatic handshakes, was scheduled to be held at company headquarters in Fort Worth. For years, this summit had been a formality, a polished performance to show off the company's global reach. But this year, the tone had shifted. The keynote address, originally meant for one of the board's senior vice presidents, was quietly reassigned. Kellerman made the decision himself without fanfare. And he made only one call, to Denise Atwater. "I want you to deliver the opening," he told her. "Not a speech, a story. The one only you can tell." She hesitated. "You realize what that'll look like. I'm counting on it." Denise wasn't nervous. She was deliberate. For days, she spent her nights reviewing the summit lineup, the guest list, every country represented. She cross-referenced it with Halberg's vendor history, previous contract disputes, translation mishaps, and the morale survey results Kellerman had shared with her weeks earlier. She didn't want applause. She wanted transformation. On the morning of the summit, as executives arrived in sleek black cars and photographers clicked, from behind velvet ropes, Denise walked through the side entrance. She wore a tailored navy blue dress. No frills, just presence. Her old janitor badge, now deactivated, rested quietly in her purse. Not for show, for memory. The main conference hall was a sea of tailored suits in accented conversation. Rows of chairs wrapped around a raised stage bearing the Halberg crest in gold. The audience included delegates from Morocco, Brazil, Germany, India, and several Fortune 100 partners. Some leaned forward in curiosity. Others sat with veiled skepticism. Kellerman introduced her personally with only one line. "She's the reason you're here. You just didn't know it." When Denise took the podium, there was a moment of hesitation. Not hers, theirs. The kind that asks silently, is this woman really going to lead this? Then she spoke. "In 13 years, I cleaned the same floor hundreds of times, and every night I heard things people didn't think that I could understand. Portuguese contracts being mistranslated, cultural nuances being overlooked, deals falling apart over a single wrong phrase. I was mopping up spilled coffee, but hearing the gaps no one saw." She paused, scanning the room. "I speak 9 languages. I've read your vendor contracts, sat in on your translation calls, and helped repair misunderstandings that could have cost this company millions. And yet, for over a decade, not one person asked what else I could do." A hush fell. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to ask a question. If someone like me could be missed for 13 years, who else have you walked past?" She told them about the Voice Inside program, about Angela in Custodial, who runs a bakery, about Bao, the intern who speaks Vietnamese, about the stories she collected that didn't fit resumes, but held more talent than any title ever could. She ended with, "This isn't about giving people a shot. It's about realizing the shot already happened and we missed it. Let's stop pretending talent only wears a suit." When she stepped back from the podium, the applause came slowly at first, then all at once. Some stood, some sat still processing, but no one looked away. Afterward, people lined up not to shake Kellerman's hand, but hers. The CEO of a French telecom group asked if she'd consider advising his HR team. A Nigerian logistics executive said her words reminded him of his mother. The German delegation requested a private meeting about cultural onboarding. Meanwhile, back at Halberg's 12th floor, not everyone was celebrating. Victor, the international operations lead, who once dismissed her as a novelty, read the summit coverage on his screen in stunned silence. Kellerman's internal email, now circulating globally, referred to Denise as our most pivotal internal catalyst for inclusive growth. He slammed his laptop shut. In the executive kitchen, Carla and 2 others whispered over coffee. "It's all just PR," she scoffed. Maybe someone else replied, "But PR doesn't rewrite contract clauses in 3 languages." She did. That week, Denise's office filled with new files, expansion strategy, proposals, partnership inquiries, internal staff applications for mentorship under the Voice Inside program. But what caught her attention most was a sealed white envelope with no return address. Inside, a small photo. It showed her years ago sitting alone in a janitor uniform by the supply closet. Scrawled on the back were 4 words. "We saw you first." She stared at it for a long time. Then she slid the photo into the drawer beside her old badge. Memory. Fuel. Later that evening, Kellerman visited. "You know what they're saying?" Denise looked up. "What?" "That you're the future face of this company." She smiled faintly. About time they saw it. As night fell over Fort Worth, the lights in the Halberg Tower burned a little longer. A janitor's voice had moved walls that no title ever could. And for once, the office wasn't stunned by brilliance. They were ready for it. 6 months later, Halberg International stood unrecognizable, not because of a new logo or executive shuffle, but because the heart of the company had shifted. It was called the Atwater effect. New hires spoke of it in orientation. Leadership summits dissected it on stage. And companies across industries quietly asked the same question: do we have a Denise we've never seen? In the months following the summit, Denise's influence rippled outward like concentric waves. Voice. Inside the initiative she launched to spotlight untapped internal talent became the fastest growing program in Halberg's history. Over 500 employees enrolled in the first quarter alone. Line cooks, security officers, receptionists, and maintenance staff all stepping forward with stories, skills, and experiences nobody had ever asked about. Departments were forced to look inward. Managers reevaluated how they assigned projects. Middle leadership sat in language classes taught by former cafeteria workers. HR rewrote promotion policies to include anonymous skill submissions. One floor manager confessed during a meeting, "I ignored people for years. Now I realize I've been blind by design." Kellerman didn't just applaud these changes, he institutionalized them. By Q3, every team leader was required to undergo bias training, not as a formality, but as a performance metric. Denise oversaw its development personally, making sure it wasn't about optics, but impact. The first success story from Voice Inside came from a Nigerian night guard named Emmanuel, who'd worked quietly at the Fort Worth headquarters for 7 years. It turned out he held a master's degree in supply chain optimization. Within 2 months, he joined the logistics strategy team and saved the company $1.2 million by restructuring vendor shipment timelines. More stories followed. A part-time call center worker helped the translation team correct contract language in Turkish. A cafeteria server who'd once run a hotel in Mumbai was hired to lead cultural hospitality for incoming VIP clients. None of it was charity, it was recognition. And yet through it all, Denise never changed her tone. She still ate lunch with the janitorial crew. She still answered her own emails. She never wore flashy suits. She led with clarity, warmth, and unshakable resolve. But perhaps her most powerful act wasn't something she said, but something she didn't. At the company's end-of-year gala, a black tie affair held in a downtown hotel ballroom, she was called to the stage. The room of 800 filled with executives, clients, and global partners fell silent. She walked to the podium under soft white lights, wearing a simple navy dress and the same silver necklace her daughter had given her years ago. They expected a speech. Instead, Denise pulled out her old janitor badge. She held it up. "This was who I was the day before someone saw me." A pause. No music, no applause, just a moment so still it could have shattered glass. "I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to remind you. Talent has no uniform. Potential doesn't always speak first. And silence, when respected, can be the loudest voice in the room." She left the stage without another word. No TED Talk. No applause cue. Just truth hanging in the air like a compass needle. That was Denise Atwater's legacy, not a rise, but a reveal. Not elevation, but clarity. And in that clarity, entire culture shifted. Kellerman later said in a board meeting, "She changed what we thought leadership looked like. When asked if she'd take a C-suite title, she declined. I'm more useful between the lines." But in the background, she worked quietly with Compass. Forward, the nonprofit she helped relaunch to expand the Voice Inside initiative beyond Halberg. They partnered with logistics firms, airport authorities, and hotel groups. They built toolkits, training, and anonymous talent, matching networks where credentials were second to skill. By the following spring, 3 major companies had adopted Voice Inside. By fall, 8 more. And by the end of the fiscal year, one metric spoke louder than any press release: employee retention in pilot programs rose by 38%. Diversity metrics improved across leadership roles. And anonymous reviews cited the same phrase again and again: "I feel seen." Denise's daughter, now a nurse and mother herself, brought her to a community college one Saturday afternoon. The two of them sat quietly in the back row of a student-led leadership panel. One of the speakers, a young black woman in business casual, tapped her mic nervously and began, "My name is Aisha, and I used to think the world wouldn't notice people like me. Then I read an article about a woman named Denise Atwater." Denise blinked, her hand tightening gently on her daughter's. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Because legacy doesn't always come with a stage or spotlight. Sometimes it walks quietly through back doors. Sometimes it holds a mop. Sometimes it answers in fluent Portuguese when no one else can. But always it leaves the door open wider than it found it. Denise Atwater's name never lit up a stock ticker. But it did light up something far more powerful: The belief that no one is ever truly invisible, only waiting to be seen. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.